It's time to start the afternoon sessions. So hopefully everyone's had a chance to see which of the 4 options you're going to choose this afternoon. For those of you who have been to a BCG main field day, it's all about following the flags. So there's 4 sessions this afternoon on the program, and there's 4 different venues. The black flag is in here, and the yellow flag is in the supper room, and there's 2 other flags which are over at BCG. So, if you know which session you're going to, you're that one. Actually, I haven't got the information for which ones the other 2 are. Oh, okay. Hang on, I'll just find out a bit more information. The Agriculture Diversification session is in here now, and that's the black flag. The Growers as Innovators is the yellow flag, which will go to the supper room next door. And if you're in either of the other 2, then go out the front and find the right flag for you for that session, for those sessions. Have you got a few people coming? Does anybody need me to repeat that? This in this hall will be the Agriculture Diversification session. In the supper room is Growers as Innovators, and anything else go outside and find the right flag. Beautiful, I reckon we're done. Excellent. It's always a bit of a logistical nightmare, especially after lunch. So welcome to the Agriculture Diversification session. We have 3 interesting speakers for you in the next hour. Our first speaker will be via video conferencing as well, and he will give us a talk about risk management, insurance and weather derivatives. Hello, Jonathan. This is Jonathan Barrett from Pro Celsius. He's been involved in the derivatives market. Can you hear us, Jonathan?
Yeah, I can hear you loud and clear, no problems.
Oh, excellent. Terrific. So Jonathan's been involved in the derivatives markets for the last 35 years. He's obtained experience in Australia, London, Chinese and Hong Kong in their markets. He has a proficient knowledge in all aspects of the derivative markets, including the developing weather derivative industry. He's regarded as a go-to person in any discussion on the foreign exchange, commodity futures and equity derivative markets. His respect in the market has been gained to the extent that he's a regular commentator and guest strategist on Sky Business, CNBC Asia, Reuters, Bloomberg TV, NDTV India, TV18 India and UTTV India as well. Jonathan holds various board positions whom draw on his extensive experience in all facets of the regulated and OTC derivatives markets. So, welcome, Jonathan.
Thanks very much for that kind introduction. I guess where we really generally start, I guess, is that climate, weather, whether it's heat, whether it's rain, we're all certainly dependent on it as growers. And if we don't get the right rains, then obviously, or the right temperature, then crops have certain issues. So the talk I'm going to give is just a short talk. It's a brief introduction on weather derivatives, what we call them weather certificates. Basically, they're contracts which hedge you against adverse weather effects, and as we can all appreciate, over the last seasons and further up north in Queensland, the last couple of seasons, we've had major concerns there with the rain. These types of products are there to help you. Once you get an understanding of how they operate, you can apply them to quite a few areas. I guess when we look at it, if we just focus on, I guess, what the products are, they are bespoke solutions that come down to your farm. We look at the BOM rainfall or temperature over your property on a 5 by 5 kilometre grid. We use satellite imagery. We look at crop yields. We analyse the risks that you're seeing. Everybody is different in terms of the moisture requirement for a plant, So we design these products actually around the plant, how the plant's behaving for a particular season. And as we know, each year it changes. But what we do know is that crops need certain moisture requirements, and it's those moisture requirements or heat requirements or heat units which we look to hedge. So when we look at it, our services include the risk analysis for your property. Growers call us up, we have a look at it, we have a chat, we structure the risk transfer product, then we execute, and also settlement. Also, we do a lot of education because a lot of people just try to understand how these products are grown. So when we start to look at it, we look at the crop. We look at the modelling software. You can see that this is how the crop follows. It certainly has its certain areas where it requires moisture. You know, if you're sowing into a dry bed, you need that moisture to be able to rain to tap into any moisture that you've got. If you're sowing into a dry bed, also you need a certain amount of requirement before it germinates. So we look at all these types of models, and then we come up with something that actually fits to your property through looking at how your plant behaves to the moisture and heat units. So just quickly, when you look at these types of products, once you get a grasp of them and once you understand, you can apply them to all sorts of things. And we'll just quickly go through some of the areas where we find not just growers, but livestockers, horticulturists actually use these products. So when you look at here, livestock, livestock requires pasture growth, frequency, intensity, I guess the lot graze. So I guess when you look at it, we want to be able to enable or empower the pastoralists to be able to make decisions about having to bring more hay in, more fodder in. That's an additional expense. So when we look at those expenses, we look to try and hedge them. So in this case, for livestock, we look at the NDVI index, which I think a lot of you have actually heard about, but we apply a type of an insurance or a weather derivative over it so you can be compensated if in fact there is issues out there, with the weather, which we've obviously seen this season. These types of products come under the handle of a parametric. What that basically means is that it's a trigger. You know that you need, over spring, for instance, or over germination, you need 2 days of rain greater than 8 to 12 mils. If you don't get that rain, then you need to hedge yourself, because then you've got a chance that you might have to re-sow. But when you look at the livestock, that's one area which the growers look at. When you look at the horticulture, once again, it's another area where horticulturists look at, they adapt their precision farming techniques, but if the weather is unkind to them, it might be too much rain, it might be frost, it might be too less rain. All these types of things can be used to be preemptive to actually hedge your inputs. So now what we're going to do is we're going to focus pretty much on Broadacre. So we'll move into that. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and describe the covers that we find that growers actually use. Now, the important thing about when you're looking at the Broadacre solutions is that these solutions, cover, just wonder if you could go to the next slide. Yeah, thank you. When you look at these are solutions which we're still quoting today. And we understand that in this market, when we've had drought, we say, well, what's the liquidity like in these products? And when we look at it, we're still quoting now, we're still quoting growers up north. We quote growers in Western Australia, obviously growers in Victoria, South Australia. So you get a sense that these products are world-rounded in terms of the usage. And what we've done over time is we've tailored these particular solutions to fit in with the crops that you actually grow. So what we do is we look at the weather, we look at your area. If it hasn't had the required rain for a crop, you might be winter dominant, you might be summer dominant. I think around Victoria, it's more winter dominant type of rain which you look at. So when you look at that, we'd say, well, okay, once you have planted, you need the initial rain. Once you have that initial rain for emergence, you get a sense that well, my crop's underway. And what we look at, we look at what you require for that 1 to 2 months worth of germination. And what we say, there's an emergence certificate around that. If you know you're coming up to Anzac Day and that's your planting window, you say, well, okay, what's the forecast looking? I'm going to sow some crops, but I do need that germination rate. I am concerned. So you'd have an emergence weather certificate, which would actually cover your cost of seeds, some of your fertilisers, some of your inputs, in that, just in case you don't get that follow-through rain. And then as the season progresses, we might look at the Emergence Plus. And that Emergence Plus is a certificate that covers that germination, but it also then covers, that lack of spring rain. And as we know, as we go through the season, we look at how the crop is behaving. The ideal season for us is that people don't use weather certificates or derivatives, because that means it's a perfect year. But at the end of the day, the crop responds to moisture, the crop responds to heat, and if you have concerns, it's always good to say, well, okay, this is the type of cover that I might look at in terms of hedging my needs there. So when we look at that emergence period, that important period where the plant needs to germinate, then the plant needs to tap into any subsoil moisture there, then you know you're on your way. If you've got the requirements, and your agronomist will also know this, he'll know that you have the rain, he'll know that you have the moisture, so then you wouldn't look at these types of covers. So you might look at something a little bit less. Now that's sort of the emergence, that's for growing, but what about frost? Frost is an issue. It's, as we know, frost is a 2-week window. It's obviously that anthesis, which we know can be devastating. What we look at the reasons why that frost occurs. And we would say that, okay, when we look at that frost, we have, and we have, we know it occurs below that -2. And that's when frost is devastating. But you also might have frost burn below 0. So we design the contracts to compensate you for those conditions. Now, the compensation, is a monetary value which we look at. Could be the inputs, the weather or the temperatures or the rain comes from the BOM. The BOM is the provider, the gatekeeper of all our information. And if you go to our website, there's more information, about certain terms and things and a few examples. But the frost assist, basically, if you feel you're going to have a frost situation, you can take out some cover. The covers start from 20 days prior to the risk period, and then you get paid 20 days after the risk period. So when you look at the contracts, they're quite neat. You might say that you're needing a certain amount of, or you're trying to hedge against that period of frost. You intuitively know that you've got some issues, that you might have some issues. It could be moisture, but then if you can then take out the cover, it's quite easy to actually do. What we do talk to growers is we educate them first on the types of covers. They have an understanding first, and then once they have the understanding, then they just take it up when they feel. So let's look at another one, contract washout. Sometimes we know we can't deliver what we promise in a contract. So sometimes we have to go in and wash out that contract, which can be quite expensive. It might be the case that you're not getting those spring rains that you need. If you don't get those spring rains, then it could be quite devastating. So we look at the phenology, if in a different way, of the plant, and then that dictates the covers that we actually look at. Now, you might not necessarily need to wash out your contract. You could take a spring rain deficit cover, and that should hedge you and give you more of an opportunity for your crop to pick up if, in fact, we do get that rain towards the end of spring. So it's designing these types of covers to suit your needs. Each farm is different in terms of how their balance sheets are structured. Each farm is different in terms of how the moisture is structured. So when you do look at it, it really is a bespoke type of solution that you look at. So let's look at spring rainfall deficit. And you look at the spring rainfall, it's a similar thing. That's when, as you know, you've got the filling, what happens if you don't get the required rainfall? If you don't get that required rainfall, then it becomes an issue. So and that issue is what we're trying to hedge there. So we look at that, it's a yield shield type of product. Once again, it's delivered straight to you in terms of what you're looking at, what you need. So let's have a look at that, the harvest. Now this is an interesting one because when I look at growers, that's all the inputs are in at this stage. All the inputs are there and we're just waiting for harvest time. So that's when you really need that return. And if you do get a wet harvest or a downgrade, then that's the issues that you actually have. So in my mind, this is one of the most important contracts because it's a wet harvest cover, and it hedges. It hedges you for those needs if in fact you do get a downgrade. And that's why I like those type of contracts. They only last for 2 weeks to 3 weeks, but it is at that pointy end of the business. It's that pointy end where you really need every dollar counts when you've got that cost recovery with profit. And I think in my mind, and we are seeing it now that more opportunities coming from more finances as well, financiers, banks, where they're looking to cover these types of contracts because they also know that at the end of the day, this is the pointy end of the business. This is where the money counts. And if you do get a wet harvest or a downgrade, it becomes a little bit of an issue. So I guess in this, it's a relatively short because I am offering a conversation, but I urge you to go to the website and have a look at what the types of covers we've got there. One of the big questions that growers always ask is, what are the costs for these types of products? They vary. They vary between, whether you're talking on a per tonne basis, whether you're talking on a per hectare basis. You can see things at about $10 a tonne. You can look at things about $10 a hectare. But the key to these things is you want it to work, you want it to be appropriate. You don't want to have a cover that won't pay. And I find that most growers look for covers where, it's a long shot that it actually happens. So when you can look at the sum insured, the amount you want to cover, and you want something that's actually effective for you, then you can look at something like this, which might come in between that 5 through to 10% of the sum insured. So I guess look at that. I urge you to have a look at the website. And if you just get in touch with us, we do like to talk. So we've got a team of guys that can service. The website gives you an idea to look through, look for quotes, test things, test areas. Then you might say, look, I just want to educate myself. Go to the website and or talk to us. We're a pretty friendly bunch of people and always happy to help. So you can go to the last slide if you like. That's that one. That's the get in touch. So I guess just before, if there are any questions, just quickly.
Thanks very much, Jonathan. Yes, there's a hand going straight up.
I'm interested in the frost cover. Do you actually pay on actually frost damage or on temperature from the nearest Bureau of Meteorology?
We do two things. Frost is a very hard one. We look at the altitude. The readings come from the bomb, okay? So we actually try and look at, the measurements are from a Stevenson's box, which is 1.2 metres above. So that's the ambient temperature which we work on. And we work on a cover which is what we call a high degree day. It's a cover which says if you have multiple areas below a threshold, you start to get paid. It's best to go run that through an example, but we don't assess the damage. We pay based on what the temperature has done from the bomb.
Which could be 30 kilometres away.
That's correct. What we do, right, we look and we correlate, okay? We look at the bomb data, we look at your data. If you have a station close by, we'll correlate that data. So what you will find is that although a frost might happen at 0, the trigger for your particular property, because the altitude might be higher, it might be at 1 degree, okay? The important thing is to have data that works for your farm. You will know when you have frost and what temperature was at your property. If we have a high correlation between your data, we then work it out with your nearest station. Now, having said that, we don't work off the bomb station. We can do that, but we work off gridded data. And it's having that match of gridded data to your station, which is the most important thing. And if there's a high correlation there, you've got a match, and then your frost certificate will work. Does that answer that question?
Anyone else have a question for Jonathan? I suppose just one thing I was going to ask Jonathan was in terms of the, you mentioned you cover a number of different commodities. Have you got an idea of how much of, say, the grain growing belt that you, sort of population that you, how widespread you cover?
Yeah, that's fine. Absolutely. We basically cover the whole wheat belt everywhere. Now, the importance of that is that you have what we call temporal and spatial dispersion. So if you have a farmer that's in central Queensland, you have a grower in northwest New South Wales, Victoria, South Australia and Western Australia, you have enough growers there to be able to provide a reasonable reinsurance model that allows us to create liquidity. The importance of this is being able to create liquidity for the growers to use it when they can. And if you have participants from the whole wheat belt, then you know that you've got that liquidity. And as I said, just stressing that we're providing covers now for growers. And this is the worst drought that we've actually seen. So when I get that, I mean, it's not a fair weather sailing contract. We are there providing liquidity for people that want to hedge against sort of that adverse weather, particularly coming into next year up north, where they are summer dominant. People are still trying to hedge that summer dominant coming into their winter crop.
I bet they are. Yeah.
Yeah, it's tragic.
All right, if there's no further questions, I might ask you all to thank Jonathan again. Thanks, Jonathan.
Thanks very much, and have a look at the website. There's plenty of examples on there.
Terrific. Thanks. And I think there's probably a bit of word of mouth going around too now that you've been in the market for a few years as well.
Yeah. Thanks very much.
So our next part of the session is probably on a bit different and not on the video conferencing. So I might ask our next two speakers to both come up on the stage, because I think Peter Vogel and Craig Henderson are speaking about opportunities related to the Wimmera Mallee pipeline. They've both got presentations to give, but we're hoping we'll have a bit of a Q&A session with the audience and Peter and Craig, who've got some really great stories to tell. And I reckon they're probably pretty good at telling them. So I'll just first of all introduce Peter Vogel, who's the chairman of Grampians Wimmera Mallee Water. For those of you who may not know, I'm his deputy chair, so that's how he got roped into speaking today. And thanks again for the water cart out the front. So Peter's family has farmed at Washout West since the area was settled. He's been not only involved in the water industry, but also in local government. But his main area of influence has been, or impact has been in the water industry, and he was heavily involved in the development of the Wimmera Mallee pipeline, which I would certainly describe as our region's biggest project ever, and certainly our biggest adaptation to climate change to date. And it will probably be difficult to surpass that in terms of the impact that it's had on not just our farming, but our farming communities. Peter will speak to us today about the benefits of the pipeline and the untapped potential that there's still in there. Thanks, Pete. Get up here then, or are you going to speak from there?
Oh, you want me to go?
No, yes. Then I can sit down here, you see.
Oh, you want to sit down and report on me at the next board meeting? Have we got a slide there somewhere, please? Oh. Yeah, well, we need the next slide. Everyone knows I'm OAM and chairman and so forth. May I also point out that I do it from here. Ah, here we go. I may point out the OAM is because of the pipeline, and I happen to be the recipient of it for about 200 people. And some of those people came from Birchip with Pipe Right and so forth. I think that one of the great things about the Wimmera-Mallee pipeline and the ones we're doing now is that we actually learnt from Wimmera-Mallee water, not Grampians Wimmera-Mallee water, on what the deficiencies were when they did the Northern Mallee pipeline, and it was made an enormous difference. The Wimmera-Mallee pipeline effectively wiped out 163,000 megalitres we put out into the channel system, and we got that back down to the point where 80-odd thousand goes into the environment. And for all the ones in the room that think too much goes into the environment, I want you to remember we got $532 million out of governments to put water into the environment. If you look at that, we've got a 40-odd thousand megalitre entitlement as the Water Authority, but one of the trades we did was that we got 20,000 megalitres of growth water. At the moment, we're in the position where we own another further 6.4 in the Murray-Goulburn, which we actually bought more water than we needed because when we did the pipeline, we had a little bit more money than we needed. So we spent it wisely on your behalf. And we'd actually bought the water and claimed to the federal government that we'd just bought it, and they very generously agreed. We developed a strategy in relation to the marketing of this growth water, and we had a sale in 2010 or something like that, and in fact I think it's in another slide, Donald Mineral Sands bought 7,000 megs at 2.5. The ability we've got, or part of the deal we did with John Thwaites was there was to be basically no irrigation, no flood irrigation. You could have drip irrigation, so it went into vineyards and that type of stuff, or any horticulture. Vineyards have availed themselves of it. The other big buyer in the whole system has been when we've had extended pipelines. We're just about finished Southwest Loddon, I think that's middle of October, end of October, November I mean, and we're now working at Eastern Grampians. A speaker earlier on, I heard, made the statement about runoff. I think the thing that some people miss on runoff, and it was the last one we had, is about farming sectors now simply don't have the runoff they used to. I know climate change is dropping the amount of precipitation we get, but Eastern Grampians, you know, they get, a lot of them only just got their catchment dams full. And that's now because they're either cropping and they're using new techniques, new varieties, and they utilise the water, or the grazies have gone to perennial pastures. They just have a minimum amount of runoff. So I think of all the pipelines we've done, if you eliminate Wimmera-Mallee where it was compulsory, where these are voluntary, we've had more people apply before the pipeline than any other one in Eastern Grampians. Oh, well, I've done that one. Our staff haven't got them in the order I do it. So I think the Eastern Grampians one is most interesting. It's probably the first time we have looked at one and we've had to work so hard to get money for when there are so many benefits. The return on it is very, very large. The holdings in the growth water by the mines, which none of it's used at the moment, it just all sits there and keeps going into carryover. But I believe that Scott Morrison is making an announcement in Perth today or tomorrow or something in relation to mining. One of the big things in mining is that, I know a little bit about mining. I've got a daughter and son-in-law who are mining engineers. But there's a lot of mining leases around Horsham. One of the things that's in those mining leases is rare earths. Rare earths are basically dug up and exported to China because their environmental rules are considerably less than ours. When you look at renewables, you look at batteries, you look at lithium, there's millions of tonnes of lithium reserves in Australia, and I know very well that the radio this morning on the way up, but one of the things Scott Morrison's going to say is what we should be doing is processing this in Australia. Now, Iluka at the moment, who own 5,000 of that 12, they're looking at one just south of Horsham for rare earth, and I reckon it'll go ahead. The reason being that I think it's 88% of all rare earth comes out of China, and you can rest assured that America do not approve of that. So it will change. So I think there's a big chance of the mining ones really picking up. Got to put the glasses down there. When we held the sale, it went for 2,500 megs. On the right-hand side, you can look at high priority reliability water out of the Murray system, and ours works out to be the cheapest. You know, they're up around 6,000, 4,000 megs for high reliability water. Well, we're at 2.5. There's presently not an active market. One of those reasons is we've still got over 6,000 of growth water. There will be a market when we get rid of it all, but I talked to Craig on the phone on Sunday and I said one of the questions will be, is it going to be like the Murray-Darling Basin where you can have private buyers and you can shift it around all over the place? Well, the answer's no, it won't be, because when we did this, there was a push from the bureaucracy to have a similar trading system. We refused to do that. It can't go out of the Wimmera Mallee, Northern Mallee system. It can't be held by private traders, and if someone on System 3 wants to trade into System 4, as a buyer in System 4, they cannot do it unless they get the authorisation from the Water Authority, because we have to have the ability to supply it through one of the 6 systems. I was a bit dubious about putting this one up when you consider the amount of farms that are being invaded lately. But this is a partial map of the intensive users we've got. And I picked it up last night and was sitting there looking at it on my iPad, and I found 10 more that I knew of that weren't there. And I actually talked to Mark last night, this morning, Carolyn, on the way over, and said, this is one we really need to be very careful with because it puts all the intensive users up. But also what it does is put up the opportunities that the pipeline's created with this growth water, because that automatically, I have been told, this swings me straight across to one Mr Henderson, whose intensive industry is not on that map. So the map's quite outdated, and I actually got another one this morning, and I thought, well, by the time we get Lou to upload it, we might as well just accept the fact that the one we've got's outdated. So now I'd like to introduce you. Are you doing it or am I doing this? Right. I'd introduce Craig Henderson, who has come into the region recently, although his parents left the region, it would have to be 50 years ago. Not quite. 40 years ago. Oh, there you go. Thought it'd be more than that. I've been married for 45. 6, actually. So I thought it was before we were married. I played tennis with his parents. So he's come back, and he's in the Wilka area and Berrowillick and a couple other little areas. And I'll introduce him to talk about his broiler sheds and because of the pipeline.
Thanks, Peter. Thanks for inviting me, Carolyn, along to talk here. And I'll just give a quick rundown on... I was born in Donald, left when I was 16, and we went to more refarming, and because we couldn't get ahead enough, we thought, because 3 of us wanted to go on the farm. And then in 2003, I'd had probably a gut full of farming, and our children were due to go to boarding school, so we decided to move to Brisbane and put a manager on, and then leased it out to a IMF scheme, the farm. And that was meant to be for 10 years, and it lasted 3, so we got the farms back. and we'd started buying down here in Victoria, and both of my sons said that they wanted to go farming, and we were living in a bay suburb of Brisbane. So that sort of put a bit of a spanner amongst the works there for a little while. So we took that on board, and we all agreed to go and move on, and we moved back down here in 2009. And that's just when the pipeline had reached our place at Wilka. And one of the comments we've had over a few sessions at Wilka with Peter and a couple of other people is that Pauline said she couldn't live here if we didn't have the water. We couldn't live here because when we turned up, there was no garden in our house. It was all dead. Coops had a nice garden there years beforehand, and it all died. So the pipeline for the mental health side of things has been tremendous, really good. So, and I can remember when I was a kid, about 13 or 14, standing on a channel bank, we're diverting water into our house down with my grandfather, and he said this was in the 70s, and they were talking about piping that channel in the 30s after some dry periods there. So, and the Wimmera Mallee pipeline is a really good example of locals and government working together and getting a hell of a good outcome, because we have really good infrastructure here now with this water system. It's just a matter of when and how we use that infrastructure to help our community. So, and we probably couldn't say that about the Murray-Darling system, could we? But it is a fantastic lot of infrastructure, and we ran a piggery years ago at Mallee, and we ran our own water and bores and that, and I know what it takes to maintain and look after that sort of infrastructure. It's quite time consuming. So, in 2014 was a pretty bad year, and bringing in a bit of what we was on the last session, an opportunity come up for some multi-peril insurance. So I wasn't too sure about it, and broker come and seen us, and he come back on the last day, and he said, "What are you going to do?" I said, "Well, I've been through the Bureau's statistics, and we have a 2 to 1 chance that you're going to pay me, and that's the best insurance policy I reckon I could find." So, and I actually did say that we're going to kick your butt. It's going to be a drought. And that was 2015. So we spent the premium, and then we got paid 11 to 1 out on that premium. So I looked at that now, I thought, as a long-term business strategy to be able to cover that way. That's one way of doing it. Or another one is, how do we get a constant cash flow through our farming business and mitigate risk? So we looked around at different things, and we've been involved in a lot of other different things up north, and we come up with building the chicken sheds. So the first thing we had to do when we come up with that was to work out power, water, a contract and permits to have a broiler farm. So I rang up Bendigo, I think it was Power Corp, and after a conversation, him telling me that I've got to pay him to tell me how much it's going to cost to hook the power up, and I just said, "We'll cut the chase, what's it going to cost?" He said, "Well, somewhere between $500,000 and $1.5 million. And I said, "Right, that's no problem. We will just forget that, and we'll build our own power station." So that was not a problem. Then we went on, and I actually rang Peter and to find out about the water, because without water, we couldn't do a damn thing. So I got onto Horsham, and they went through, and they've got to measure the pipeline and the size of the pipes and so on to make sure they can get up to 50 meg flow a year. And that was possible. There's a mains through our house block and 2 mains coming off up past where we've got our broiler sheds now. And then we got a contract and the permit through Blake Shire for 400,000 free-range broiler farm. So that's how it sort of come about. We just wanted to have a consistent, well, when you get a drought, we just didn't want to go below the line. We just wanted to keep a consistent income coming in. So we end up, we've got six, I don't know what's on this slide. We've got six broiler sheds. They're brand new ones, so they haven't grassed up. That was this winter. We've built 6 so far out of 8, and they hold roughly 45,000 birds. They're free range. Up until they're 21 days they stay inside, and they're free range birds. They're antibiotic free. There's no animal protein in any of their diets, which is like fish meal and so on. RSPCA accredited, FIFA accredited, and we're about 60% renewable energy through our own solar battery generator system. Each shed will produce about 13 to 1,500 cubic metres of litter a year that we put on our paddocks at about 8 cubic metres to the hectare. So over time, we haven't got enough sheds to get right across our property, but over time we're building up the organic matter in the soil, and we're and that litter, the last check, had 29 units per tonne of potassium, 9.8 of phosphorus, plus all the other trace elements. All the good things in to grow a good chicken is in that manure to grow a good crop. So it was just a part of the vertical integration of the farm business. And also the 6 sheds at the moment will use about 8,000 tonne of feed a year. So that's keeping that grain in the area instead of exported or carted down to port. We're running at the moment a 215 kilowatt solar system, which produces about 1 megawatt per day on average. We have 260 kilowatt battery storage, which you can only draw down about 60% on. And it's a living thing by putting the energy, it's a capital versus diesel. So we get it up, get it running, monitor it, measure it, and work out the capital expenditure to minimise the amount of diesel. So it's a living thing. So we run at the moment, that's our main generator that will run the whole farm if our system breaks down. So that's a 350 kVA generator. I'll just go to the other ones here in a minute. Must be at the back of it, I think. Well, that's the battery setup, the shed. That's an air-conditioned, climate-control part of the shed. We're looking at doubling that shortly. So there's we can handle about 48 kilowatts in or out an hour with that system, with surges up to 90. So that's what the battery system is. That's got, believe it or not, and I don't understand it fully, but solar is a dirty type of energy as far as your motors go. So there's a filter system on it and all controlling, automatic controlling and automatic switching. There's the middle-sized generator. There's an 85 kilowatt, then a 210 kilowatt, and also the 350 kVA, generators. And so you've got to keep mitigating risk, and you're responsible for the animal welfare of the chickens. So we've got about 40 metres from the shed, another point where we can switch all the power over, and a mobile generator can take over if this burnt down, because you've got to be able to do that within less than 20 minutes, so on a hot day. So that's I suppose the end result, the litter coming out of the shed into the spreader, and so we can put that back on our paddocks. Paddocks. That'll give you a bit of example how the air conditioning works in the shed. So you've got the outside temperature is 42.3 degrees. We're aiming for 18 and we're sitting at 26, but there's a chill factor on that, so it brings that down to about 22 on that really hot day. And they use a tremendous amount of water on those hot days. The chickens are basically like they're inside an evaporative cooler. So but when the weather's right, they're outside. So this is just an aerial shot of some of the solar on the new section. A shot of the whole lot. There's another 2 sheds can fit in that grassed area to your right. I'd love to show this in a few years and this is green again. So as you can see the solar there, I said to the bloke who put the solar on, why didn't you put it even across it? But anyway, it's not even because I'd like a symmetrical looking setup. So we had to put, we've got 1.75 megs of water storage there. We've got 2 pipelines coming in, just your standard stock and domestic one from the house, and then we've got another 50 millimetre one coming off the mains to supply the water. So we've got a lot of water stored on farm, because you don't know if you get 3 or 4 hot days in a row at full capacity, what's going to happen to GWM. It's all mechanical, it can break down. So finish with it now. So that's a quick overview of the chicken enterprise. We run 3 full-time staff, 5 casual, plus the trucks and the service industry to the sheds, and the opportunities with water. I've talked to Peter about this before. Whether it's chicken or ducks or sheep. Finishing off your lambs, if we've got a dry season, so you've got to have the water, whether it's free-range pigs or intensive piggery or horticulture or maybe fish farming or yabbies, all that. The opportunities are there. It's just a matter of getting hold of them and we're doing the numbers and seeing. If you've got 25 acres out of town, you could go and buy a bit of water, there's growth water there, and put some sort of small business in the area to help sustain your own income, whether it's flowers or whatever. But the on-flowing effect, like it's take of the chicken sheds, is that maybe one day we're allowed to put a mill in and we can mill our own farm grain and maybe supply to other farmers. Put a mill in, maybe someone wants to put a processing plant in, the transport. All this industry then stays local because of the water. If we didn't have the water, we wouldn't have this. So I think there's some huge opportunities. I'm a strong advocate for rural areas. I've lived in the city for 7 years. So we need to think outside the square, outside the box, and start thinking of this resource that we can use wisely, because it is a really good resource. And without water, you can't do nothing. We've got plenty of sun. We can do your own power. That's easy. So just a few bucks. But anyway, I'll take some questions and see how we go from there.
Terrific. Thanks, Peter and Craig. I think that gives a really good summary of what's happened in the region in terms of the Wimmera Mallee pipeline and the opportunities that it created, and some really terrific example of someone really taking on board those opportunities. So thank you for your presentations. Does anyone have any questions from the floor? Thanks. I'm hoping there's some people who've come from outside our direct region who have really learned a lot from this presentation.
Oh, it's a quick one with the chooks. What sort of insulation have you got in the roof, please?
There's a weight. We've got tin lined on the inside with, and I'm not sure exactly what sort of insulation. I know the new sheds are that new product that is not inflammable. The old ones I'm not sure, but the new ones are a new special type of Australian-made product to make sure it's complies with all the new laws. And just another thing I'd like to comment on there, if we can use the grain in the area, it's what it takes to grow a tonne of wheat in this area, or just north of Birchip. A further 60% of that is fuel to get it by truck to port. So if we've got a strong rail system, or we've got a strong regional business, the amount of fossil fuel we use is going to be a hell of a lot less. So I just thought I'd throw that bit in there.
Yep.
Actually, I've got a bit to throw into on renewables.
Excellent.
Government have decreed by 2025, I think,
Yep.
2025, that we have to cut our carbon emissions by 19%. We'll achieve that next year. And what the board are looking at now, we're doing all this stuff behind the meter, but we're doing a strategy. They did an investment logic map last week when we had board. Karen and I weren't there, but staff were. and we're looking at like the storages in Birchip aren't used, Sea Lake, also water storages that are used, putting solar panels on them. We've discussed it with PowerCore. It's very feasible for us to become a net generator of power into these communities, so especially the smaller ones, where they have a lot of outages. So we're seriously looking at that. I would say when we do our strategic plan in February, March, we'll front up again to have a brief go at it. Renewables will be a big thing. I think we're spending 3.2 this financial year on them, and that'll get spent. So the only other one, which I did forget, Carolyn, was on that map of intensive users. If anyone in here is on it, make sure the authority know about it. The reason, if you're an intensive user, is that it's like Craig. We all know Craig's got one. If something goes wrong, they will automatically text him and say it's down, the pipeline's down. So he can automatically go to reserve supply. And that's the big reason we want that map to get up when I looked at it last night, to get up to speed, because I came up with 10 that weren't there. So, you know, and that's basically just around here. So,
do we have any other questions? One thing I thought that it might be worthwhile asking you, Peter, is there's so much talk about drought and water supplies and towns running out of water, particularly around New South Wales. I certainly sometimes get asked, as being a member of the board, about our water supply. Can you just give us a bit of a feel of how well placed our region is for water? For example, if we had another 2 or 3 years of well below average inflows.
Well, if you take the lowest inflow we've ever had, and I've forgotten what year it was, if we had that for the next 3 years, the farms and towns wouldn't be on restrictions.
They would not be on restrictions.
Would not be on restrictions. We wouldn't get down to the level where we'd kick in. I would say the board would be, you know, this is not a captain's call, but I think it would be brought up probably either by you or I after 2 years whether we should automatically go to stage 1 in case there's 3 years or 4 years of it. But at the moment we wouldn't. And the reason for that is when everyone looks at it, we've got probably 43% of our storage. But as far as the pipeline goes, the critical one is Belfield. And from memory, I think it's in the mid to high 60s. And that's basically where all the water comes from. So when you look at Tolondo, we take nothing out of. Wannon takes some out of Rocklands. We transfer some from Rocklands every year, basically every year, in the middle of winter when we have our losses leased. But a lot of that's in relation to environmental water. So is Lonsdale's environmental water. The other one we keep plenty of water in is Taylor's Lake. But that's an insurance policy in case something goes wrong with Belfield. Mount Cole holds very well, and that services Ararat. And Wartook services Horsham. But we've got other alternatives at Horsham too.
Hazeldene's are saying that they are looking to double production in the next 10 to 15 years. I think their sheds are clearly going to be this side of Bendigo because, you know, the buffer zones and what aren't that way. So how did you, or obviously you would have crunched the numbers, but did you get external support, extra people to help with the business case? Because the capital investment in what you've done there is huge. I guess we say that because we are saying we're open for business for this kind of intensive agriculture in our part of the world.
Yeah, it's quite well, our setup was an extra, basically 100,000 per shed just for the power, but we hope that pays back in a long time over the 10 years. But you're looking at a 8 shed start-up now, because it's got dearer, very close to 10. But if you look at your farm values, and this is how I look at capital gain, if you look at your farm values and they've gone up and you think, oh God, it's hard to pay for land now, it's too dear and all that, but you've got good equity. And if you can invest that equity in something that's going to give you 3, 4 or 5 times the cost of the money, it is a good business decision. So I got a lot of statistics and numbers off a local grower, and then I went and talked to Hazeldene's and then talked to other producers to come up with a decision to build. The number one thing was if one of my sons were going to manage it, because I've already got a job. I didn't need a second job, so it was a way of also splitting the management of the farm and diversifying the income and keeping a more constant cash flow.
And you mentioned feed mill. Have we got the critical mass? Obviously, we've got a few out your way. Is the critical mass there yet or not yet? What's your thoughts?
Look, I think it's all possible. There's no worries about that. Whether it's an individual mill for a single farm or for a group of farms, it's all possible. It's up to the processors, if that's what they want. At the moment, it all comes out of centralised out of Sanarnet, and that goes right across the Nil to the ducks and everything. So the beauty of this area is the isolation of the poultry industry, which means the risk of disease is very low, and you can run your free range outside and have a very low risk. That's the beauty of this area, and it's more of a drier climate. So, but there is huge potential with a food conversion ratio of 1.6, 1.7 is tremendous compared to all the other proteins, bar fish.
Oh, there's another question at the back.
Yeah, with your water supply, I did some graphs up from Mildura. I'm a retired irrigator and I'm concerned about the inflows into the Murray, but I've also graphed Wimmera and Mallee headworks inflows and Perth as well. And just looking at my graph here, I haven't got the actual figures, but in the 20s you're up around about 275 gigalitres on a 20-year moving average, and you're down as low as 75 gigs on a 20-year average, which is a pretty dramatic increase, similar to the Murray, and Perth is down 86%. Are you concerned in those sort of figures?
75 gigs of 75,000 megalitres. I think the thing about it's the ability to use minimal amount of water. And if you go and have a look at Belfield, Wartook, Mount Cole, they're all extremely good catchment areas. Lonsdale used to be a good one, where Lonsdale isn't now. Tolondo a lot of that was always transferred across from Rocklands anyway. Probably the one that worries us the most, and a lot of people, is Rocklands. But the thing about it is, when we have the really wet one, 2011, it bucketed down, and that caused us problems in Belfield, because I think there are 183 landslides, and a lot of it ended up in Belfield, and which created turbidity in the water. And because a lot of our towns haven't got water treatment plants, haven't got potable water, and obviously there's no treatment into the farms, and that created a problem. But we can also take out of tailers for 1, 2, 3, 4, so we can hedge the bet there. But we need one of those probably every 5 to 8 years, a good runoff to get back up to, say, 80%, which gives you a security of supply. So you've got to remember, we're only pumping out about 9 to about 12,000 megalitres a year, I think it is. The environment allowed an average of 83, but that's an average, and that also doesn't count what we release for them under their watering plant. It also counts for their natural flows. So you say you came from Montara. Mildura. Yeah. So it's.
I'll show you the graphs after. It'd because they're quite serious, and it's the same problem in Mildura, convincing people just how serious the decrease in flows are. It's extremely serious.
Yeah, I think here
I've taken my figures off your data source from graph on page 19 of the operating plan of the Wimmera Mallee System Headworks water year 2019-2020.
Yeah, I don't doubt the figures.
Yeah.
So, but look, the board have always seriously. We've got a separate water resources section where this is monitored 4 times a year. We've got to put watering plans in and work out whether we need to do it and whether we don't. But at the moment, whilst we've still got 6,500 and we've got another 12 that's not used, we haven't got a problem. But you're quite right, the amount of catchment is decreasing everywhere. Can't hear him. Oh yeah, there's no doubt about that. So look, I'd much rather live in Wimmera Mallee with our system than I would in the Murray-Darling. I think they've got much bigger problems.
Well, probably a good example was how we managed the blue-green algae outbreak in the Murray River about 3 years ago. It meant that we couldn't get any water supply out of the Murray River in the heat of summer, but thankfully one of the learnings, I suppose, from the Northern Mallee pipeline with the new pipeline, the Wimmera Mallee pipeline, was that it actually flows both ways. So people in the Wimmera Mallee pipeline can get water from not just the Wimmera-based catchments like Belfield and Wartook and so on, but they can also get it out of the Murray River. So it flows both ways.
And Southwest Loddon's the same. Like Southwest Loddon is actually a grid. We take water out of Belfield. We also take water out of Waranga, out of the Goulburn, with agreement. And if it got really desperate, we could tap into the super pipe from Bendigo across to Ballarat. So, I think the Labor government, to their credit in the state, have seriously looked at grids. And, I know the minister very well. And she is constantly getting in touch with David Johinke, myself, a bloke by the name of David McKenzie, who used to be North East Water, is now on the Goulburn Murray board, on how we need to utilise these waters. And, it really is a serious thing when you look at, Craig came from up north and grew cotton, and they're getting a lot of flack at the moment. But I think as a community, by the time you get to 2050, you're going to be seriously looking at the utilisation of water on crops. What is going to produce the most protein for the least amount of water usage? And and this Labor government will never do it, and it's probably a 10, maybe even 15-year thing, is that there will end up being potable reuse. It's all over the world in places now. It will end up. I'm not saying it'll end up in Birchip or Sea Lake, but the minute you get Barwon water, they put gigs out into the sea, and they've got a water treatment plant to treat it to the right level to get it out there. If you're going to do that, why? And look at Werribee. Imagine the amount of Werribee gigs that go through Werribee. And, reality is it has to be used a few more times. And, due to them nearly the end of my career, I think the other thing towns have got to work out is that water's cheap. I always have firmly believed you get your urban water far too cheap. I've told this story hundreds of times. I walked past the supermarket in Warrington Bill one day and my ugly doll had been on tapping in. And this couple came out and they had a carton of cigarettes each and a slab of Bundy and Coke. Turned around and said, "You're Peter Vogel, your water's too bloody dear." And I turned around and I said, "It's not dear enough if you can afford 2 cartons of cigarettes and a slab of Bundy and Coke." But you see them in a supermarket walking out with great things of water that cost a heap of dough out of the supermarket, you're drinking World Health water. It's governed by DH&S. We have no option but to have it up to speed. The minute it's not up to speed, we've got to have boil water notices. So people just maybe have to change their habits in the certainly next 20 to 30 years.
Thanks, Pete. Well, we might take a pause there or finish there for afternoon tea. But hopefully what you've got from this session is, I think, some confidence in what has happened in terms of our water supply in this region over the last 10 years. Some of the ideas about what the Water Authority is currently considering in terms of the future going forward, and very clear recognition of the challenges we face in terms of reduced runoff. And also a great example in Craig about really making use of some of the opportunities that have come out of that pipeline. And also don't forget some of the other opportunities that Craig raised, not just in terms of intensive chickens, intensive ducks, intensive horticulture. We haven't even touched in this session on the huge increase in livestock numbers that have occurred since the pipeline came in terms of the number of sheep in stock containment areas. I don't think we're quite back to the numbers of livestock in the Mallee that there would have been in the 90s, but we're certainly travelling up there compared to what we had in the millennial drought. So thank you, Craig and Peter, for your very interesting talks this afternoon.